Today she's here, of course, in a different situation, a different category. She's here as the candidate for the United States Congress, the House of Representatives seat from the, what are we, the 10th District? 10th District. She's running against the incumbent, Congresswoman Barbara Comstock. A few comments about Jennifer's background. She's a native of the D.C. area, graduated from the University of Maryland, earned her law degree at the College of William and Mary, served as an assistant Commonwealth's attorney for Loudoun County, was president of the Loudoun County Bar Association, and was a substitute judge in the district court before becoming state senator. Now, I'll just turn it over to you. Welcome, Jennifer Wexton.
Thank you, Marilyn, and thank you to all of you for coming out this afternoon. Now, I have to say that this is a better turnout than I usually get for my town halls, so I'm very glad to see so many faces, so many familiar faces and some new faces too. I'm Jennifer Wexton, and I am the Democratic nominee for Congress here in Virginia's 10th Congressional District. I'm also proud to be your current state senator and have been in that role since 2014. Marilyn told you a little bit about my background, but I'll share some more with you for those who don't know. Now, I am the Democratic nominee for Congress in Virginia's 10th Congressional District, but I have to admit to you that it was not my life's plan to be running for Congress. I went to law school at William and Mary because I wanted to use my law degree to help people. And I was able to do that here in Loudoun County. I was a prosecutor for a number of years where I prosecuted a lot of domestic violence cases and a lot of different kinds of crime. And I also served as an attorney and advocate for abused and neglected kids. I was an attorney and substitute judge in mental commitment hearings, involuntary commitment hearings, and that led me to serve on Loudoun's Community Services Board, which is the group that oversees Loudoun County mental health. And I was working to ensure that people in Loudoun had access to mental health services. And then I was even able to serve the community for a while as a judge in our courts. But I ran for state senate in 2014, and I went down to Richmond, and I got to work legislating. I took all that experience that I had gained through my various career objectives and brought it with me to Richmond. And I have been in the minority as a Democrat in Richmond ever since I got there, but that hasn't stopped me from working across the aisle and passing over 40 pieces of legislation. And I'm proud of my bills that do things like keep kids safer in daycares and online. Legislation that helps get more resources to victims of domestic violence when they need it most. Legislation that helps combat the heroin and opioid crisis here in Virginia. And legislation that reforms our school suspension guidelines and stems the school-to-prison pipeline. And I'm very proud of all the work that we've been able to do and what we've done in Richmond. But seeing Donald Trump and what he's doing to our country, seeing his attacks on women, his attacks on immigrants, his attacks on our intelligence operations, on our free press, attacks on an independent judiciary, and congressional Republicans like Barbara Comstock who aren't standing up to him, I knew I had to step up and run for Congress. Now, this is a race where this is a big district. I mean, this is a very important race in a very important district. 10th Congressional District, it starts just outside of Washington, D.C. It goes all the way out to the Shenandoah Valley. We have a very educated population. We're one of the top in the country in terms of people who have a college education or higher. We're also a fairly affluent district. You know, we have largely been safe from a lot of what happened with the Great Recession. And we're a fast-growing district, one of the fastest growing in the nation. Loudoun County's population, since I came here in 2001, has more than doubled, quite a bit more than doubled. And as you guys know, driving around here, that it gets growing all the time. And we're also a diverse population. We have many new and aspiring Americans from different countries who want to make the 10th district their home. So it is an interesting, kind of microcosm of our country here in the 10th district. Now, Barbara Comstock has been in office since 2014, and there are some really clear contrasts between what she believes in and what I believe in and what she's worked for and what I've worked for. Some of the things that I will be working on and that I feel very strongly about are healthcare. Access to affordable quality healthcare, I believe, is a right. One of the proudest things I was just able to do this year in Richmond was to expand Medicaid to almost 400,000 vulnerable Virginians, hardworking Virginians who fall in the coverage gap. And I'm very proud that we were able to do that. And that's something that we fought for years. But there were certain people in the General Assembly who were dead set against it. And Virginia had to forego, as a result, over $5 million a day that we were entitled to. And we had people who weren't covered who were having to get care in emergency rooms. The worst possible way to provide care, the least efficient and least effective way to provide care. And now those folks are going to have insurance, they're going to have health care. And that is helping not just Virginia's physical health, but also our fiscal health. People are hiring, and that's going to have a positive impact in our economy, bringing all that money back. My opponent, on the other hand, has voted multiple times to repeal the Affordable Care Act. She voted for the Republican tax cuts, which included a repeal of the individual mandate, which has thrown individual markets into chaos. We have been told in Virginia that our premiums could increase as much as 64% in the next 12 months. So there's a pretty clear contrast there. On the issue of gun violence prevention, this is something that is so important to me. I have 2 kids in the public schools here in Loudoun County. I'm sure many of you have kids in the area who are, grandkids in the area who are in probably not kids. If so, you probably wouldn't be living here. But I'm sure a lot of you moved here to Ashby Ponds. You guys are local, your kids are local, your grandkids are local, and you have grandkids, and you're worried about what their safety is going to be, and with increasing gun violence and increasing school shootings, and this becoming the norm. This was never something just when I was growing up that we would have these school shootings and mass shootings, and it's getting worse. So in the wake of Parkland, this is becoming an issue that a lot of people are really starting to take seriously and vote on. And I've seen how this issue has evolved just in my short time in the General Assembly. For years, the only voices that we would hear down in Richmond were those of the gun lobbies. It was the NRA and the Citizens Defense League who would come and talk to us in Richmond. And the Citizens Defense League, for those of you who don't know, they're the ones who think the NRA are a bunch of wimps. But now we have new chapters of Moms Demand Action springing up all across the area, from the east to the west, all across the state. There is a new and vibrant and growing and robust group in Winchester, in the westernmost part of the district, where you wouldn't expect it. Things like universal background checks that the NRA has fought against, even in the wake of Sandy Hook and the terrible tragedies that we've seen since then. That's something that over 90% of the American public favors, but the gun lobby has prevented it from happening, and that's something that I feel very strongly I want to take on in Congress and beyond. So meanwhile, my opponent, Congresswoman Comstock, she has an A rating from the NRA. She is one of the top recipients in funding from them. They've spent over $137,000 to keep her in office. And as a result, she's carried their water and supported their legislation. I don't happen to believe that the solution to gun violence is more guns in the hands of more people in more places. So I will take that with me to Congress. On the issues of transportation. Transportation is a big deal in this region. I don't have to tell you guys, because you're here on these roads too. But Metro's coming to Loudoun County, the Silver Line Phase 2. And Metro has been underfunded and mismanaged for way too long, pretty much throughout its whole history. Metro requires Virginia, Maryland, and DC to all play nicely together. That can be a little challenging at times. So one of the problems that Metro had was that it did not have a sustainable, a consistent source of capital funding. So for big capital expenditures that they had to do, things like buying new rail cars and stuff, they did not have, because they didn't have sustained funding, consistent funding, they couldn't issue bonds and amortize the cost of these big capital expenditures over time, which is how we do things in the government. It's how the best way to make your costs more consistent over time and have a predictable expense and a predictable schedule. You know that that's no way to run a railroad. So just this year, for the first time in Metro's 40-year history, all of the member states, Maryland, DC, and Virginia, all came together and came up with sustainable, consistent funding in Virginia's case, it was $154 million a year. And I'm very proud we were able to do that this year. But the federal government needs to pony up their share too, because Metro moves the federal workforce. Over a third of federal workers take Metro to and from work every day. So they need to pony up, they need to come up with consistent their share of federal funding to renew the PREA grants of at least $150 million a year for the next 10 years. But they should also contribute to operating expenses, because we have to pay, the states and the localities have to pick up the tab for operating, because the fare box collection does not pay the way for Metro. So we need the federal government to finally pony up, and they do that in other transit jurisdictions and other transit areas, but they haven't done it for Metro. In the area of education, I am 100% the product of public education, from grade school through grad school. And so for me, making sure that our schools are as strong as they possibly can be is very important. From the K through 12 level through state colleges. So at the K through 12 level, I am very concerned about Betsy DeVos and what she's doing to try to take money out of public schools and put it into private schools. I absolutely oppose that. Same thing with higher education. College affordability is one of the top things I hear about when I'm knocking on doors and talking to constituents. Young people are very concerned, and so are their parents and their grandparents, because they're graduating from college or not graduating from college with 6 figures of debt often. And that really limits their ability to succeed in the future and what their options are as they go on about their careers. So college affordability is very important to me. And that's something I've worked on in the General Assembly, helping to create the Office of Student Loan Ombudsman to act as an advocate for students and as a go-between and as a protector when students are dealing with their lenders. But Betsy DeVos is doing everything she can to cut back on Stafford loans, Perkins loans, federally subsidized loans, and hand everything over to the for-profit colleges and for-profit lenders. And that is of great concern to me. We need to be protecting students and student lenders. So there are definitely some contrasts here. Well, I'm sure you guys will have some questions, but the other thing is just in how we're going to deal with this president, with Donald Trump. You guys have seen a lot over the years, I'm sure. But I'm willing to bet that you have never encountered a president like Donald Trump before, and probably hope never to. Many of you, most of you, I hope, probably hope never to again. But Barbara Comstock has voted with him 98% of the time. 98% of the time. And I would submit that that is out of step with the people of this district. So I have always gone into my road to elected service came through public service. I have always, throughout my history in elected service, looked to do the most good for the most people, and that is what I will take with me into Congress. So I'm happy to take any questions that you guys have. And we've got a mic, a traveling mic.
We have 2 traveling mics, and please wait for one of them and raise your hands. Who's on this side?
I got one here. Carl handed this to me.
There's no end so far, to television advertising, both on your part and Barbara Comstock. One of her ads continually talks about taxes and how much you've been responsible for increased taxes. One of the things that I don't understand, and I wonder if you could enlighten us, she includes you as a responsible person for the tolls on I-66. What possibly did you do to create those?
So this may come as a shock to you, but there is some false and misleading advertisement out there on the part of my opponent. So the taxes thing is mystifying to me because in the General Assembly, I've been part of balancing 8 budgets and haven't increased taxes once. As far as the tolls are, I'm not sure where that's coming from either. I have been on the record against those tolls ever since it was announced. We had a press conference about them. We had legislation to eliminate them, which failed in the Republican-held committees. And I still am in opposition to them. So I don't know where that comes from. She seems to be, and if you listen very closely, I'm not sure she says that that I was in favor of them or that I did them. At least in the earlier iteration of the ad, it was, these things happened and she was in office, so it must be her fault. So it's not true, but that hasn't stopped them before. So.
Ms. Wexton, many of us yesterday watched a good part of the hearing in the Senate, and I know you're not running for that particular office, but would you care to comment on what you observed or heard or, about the hearing? And I'm not sure where we are today. This obviously concerning the confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh.
How many people in this room watched some or all of that hearing? Okay, yes, okay. So this is, it's September 28th, and for me, that means that September 30th is an end of quarter, and for us, we have a lot of fundraising deadlines and everything, and so I was trying to do call time and call donors, and every single person I talked to was like, I'm watching these hearings. And so finally, I was very happy to be able to tell my staff, we got to watch the hearings because it may be like a defining moment for a generation of women and maybe of Americans in general. So I was just starting law school when the Anita Hill hearings were happening. And that was kind of, I remember it was kind of surreal because I hadn't really been out in the workaday world dealing with that sort of thing. But for me, hearing this about the allegations from parties in the 80s in Bethesda, in that prep school culture, I went to Walt Whitman High School in Bethesda, Maryland. I graduated in 1986. so I'm kind of a contemporary of these people. And my brother went to Gonzaga, which was one of the private Catholic schools. And so I am familiar with that whole culture. And so it was very strange for me seeing all the people who were kind of my contemporaries. I found Dr. Blasey Ford to be very credible, very compelling. As a prosecutor who has prosecuted sex crimes and criminal cases, I found her very credible. I found her, very compelling, maybe more so than some of the witnesses. I appreciated very much that she did not, she was not filling in details and saying things. And Judge Kavanaugh, I think, did not, I was not impressed by the tone of his testimony. I thought that, he can feel the way he feels about how this process has treated him. But the thing that was really so striking to me was that the partisan attacks of his when he first got up and started talking about it, because judges are supposed to be neutral arbiters of the facts and not prejudge anything. And in Virginia, one of the reasons that I had to stop being a judge is because I wanted to become involved in electoral politics and in politics. And you can't be a judge and be a partisan. And it just struck me as so partisan to say that this was because of the Clintons and people who don't like Donald Trump. That for me, that was almost as bad as what the accusation was in the first place. So it was very interesting. And also as a prosecutor, I believe in investigating and finding the facts. And so I didn't understand why they couldn't just put the brakes on and let the FBI do what they're going to do. And it may not, it may be inconclusive, but at least let them do it, because we're talking about a lifetime appointment, a lifetime tenure. So just the appearance of impropriety of not having an investigation really was striking to me. So it may be that they're having one now, but that's kind of where I was lost. And I'll just say that it's really sad that things have gotten so partisan, because it didn't used to be that way in the Senate,
Ms. Wexton, I'm so glad that you're here, and thank you for coming. I'm concerned about immigration, and I'd like to ask a two-part question. Okay. One, I'd like to hear your stand on immigration and the policy that the Trump administration has perpetrated on the people that want to come to our country. And second, I'm very aware of the MS-13 ad that has been following you by Barbara Comstock, and I'd like to have a response to that ad.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Immigration, we're a diverse, Virginia is a diverse state, and I believe that the diversity makes us strong. We are all the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of immigrants here in this room, unless you are entirely Native American. So the failure to protect dreamers is obviously, I think wrong. The family separation at the border is truly horrifying to me, and one of the worst things I think that this country could do. I worked with abused and neglected kids. So I worked in the foster care system with a lot of them over the years. And when the family separation stuff started, I was really struck because I remembered something that one of the foster care workers had told me years ago, which was, we don't remove a child from their parent unless it's truly, they're in imminent danger. Because if they're really in great risk of great harm to themselves, we don't remove them from their household and from their parents. Because the moment you do that, you become the villain in the worst day of that child's life. And it doesn't really matter that they're in a situation where they're not a perfect parent, or where they are living in a dirty, cramped house or whatever it is, but just removing them from their parent causes a lot of trauma. So doing this needlessly to toddlers and infants who, by the time they're reunited with their parents, don't even remember their parents a lot of the time, it's heartbreaking. We need comprehensive immigration reform. And this is another example of how far our country has come to be partisan over what it had been previously. We have a blueprint for partisan, or for nonpartisan, for bipartisan immigration reform, for comprehensive immigration reform. The Gang of Eight came up with it in the Senate, and it passed with 68 votes, 70 votes, a broad bipartisan support in 2013. And then it went to the House and it died. And they wouldn't even talk about it or debate it or have any kind of votes on that legislation in the House of Representatives. So, we need strong borders, absolutely. We need to make sure that we continue to admit people to this country legally. The Trump administration just wants to slam the doors. So it's not just, and we need to have enforcement, to enforce our borders and enforce illegal immigration and take steps to remove people who should not be here. But we need to make sure that we continue to admit people on visas. We have 30,000 unfilled tech jobs in this country. We need to train the people in America to do those jobs, but in the meantime, it's holding our employers back when they don't have the workers that they need to fill those jobs. Same thing with agricultural workers. We have seasonal workers and agricultural workers who aren't able to come to this country. You guys, I'm sure, heard the story about the news stories about the crab harvests in Maryland and Virginia, that there was nobody to pick the crabs, there was nobody, people who had been coming here for years during the season to do the crab picking. Same thing in the 10th district. Our apple farmers are becoming concerned that they're not going to have people to pick the apples when the time comes. So, and same thing also with taking in refugees. Trump administration has already cut in half the number of refugees that they're going to take, and now they're trying to cut it down even more. So we definitely need comprehensive immigration reform. MS-13. Absolutely, we need to fight crime, and we need to fight against MS-13. We need to make sure that law enforcement has, and I know this because I've prosecuted violent criminals and put them in prison. So we need to make sure that law enforcement has the resources that they need to go after MS-13 and stop, their criminal enterprises. But that's not what all that immigration is. And MS-13 is actually mostly a homegrown, U.S.-grown group. So what I don't like is that they conflate immigration and MS-13, and they're not the same thing. So, they don't want to talk about the fact that Barbara Comstock wouldn't sign on to the discharge petition so that we could have a vote on protecting Dreamers, even though a number of her Republican colleagues did, and want pivots to MS-13. They don't want to talk about the fact that they killed the bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform bill, and pivot to MS-13. So we absolutely need resources to fight crime in this country, and I will never disagree with that. But we also need comprehensive immigration reform, and not to confuse one for the other.
As you pointed out, the 10th Congressional District is long and narrow and diverse. Historically, it has been Republican since Frank Wolf was a pup. How do you explain that? Yeah, not that you can explain it, but what is your take on the demographics of the district and how it can be so Republican over a long period of time?
So the current makeup of the 10th district, it's only had this map since 2011. Because before that, it went significantly to the west and south. And so it was just redrawn in 2011. And it was, I mean, if you look at a map of the 10th district, and I would encourage you to, because it's very interesting the way that it's drawn. It goes from basically McLean, you know, just outside of Washington, D.C., all the way to the Shenandoah Valley without going through, they go from McLean to the Shenandoah Valley without going through Reston or Herndon, or, you know, they've excised various portions from the map. Because we have, you know, because it's gerrymandered, and it was drawn to ensure the election of a Republican to be named later, who turned out to be Barbara Comstock. But, you know, the map has changed. Loudoun County is a perfect example of how things change, and it's not just in terms of population. It's also just that we're kind of a swingy county. You know, some people say Loudoun is fickle. But I say Loudoun, you know, Loudoun is responsive to what's going on. The example that I like to use is, so 100% of Loudoun County is in the 10th district. There's about 47% of the votes for the 10th district live here in Loudoun. And in 2014, in those midterm elections, the last time we had midterm elections, Mark Warner, who was running for Senate, Mark Warner lost Loudoun County to Ed Gillespie for Senate, for U.S. Senate. He didn't lose by a lot, but it was, you know, 1.5 points, 2 points, something like that. But in 2017, Ralph Northam beat Ed Gillespie, same Republican, 3 years later, by 20 points. So a lot of that, some of that is, you know, is people, you know, some of that is a Trump factor, and people realizing that democracy is fragile and they can't sit on the sidelines. But some of that is also just, you know, the way that Loudoun County has changed in that period of time, and what the turnout is. So I think, you know, Loudoun is kind of the key for this election, or you know, kind of as goes Loudoun, probably as so goes the district. But I think that's a pretty good indication of how things have changed. And some of it's the environment, some of it's demographics, and a lot of it's turnout. Oh, it's on where the mics are.
How do you explain that Barbara Comstock has the support of the police and not you?
So that's that's the PBA, which is the Police Benevolent Association, which represents the sheriff deputies, and Sheriff Chapman is an elected Republican who is supporting Barbara Comstock. So that probably has something to do with it. Because they're all at-will employees as sheriffs, you know, as sheriffs' deputies. So, you know, he can fire any of them anytime for any reason. So.
I'd like to ask, before we get too far away from Fort Kavanaugh, can you explain to me more about the FBI investigation? What is it comprised of? I've spoken with some people who have been respondents to the FBI investigation, and they say that what they're asked about is current, and what they know about them currently. And they're also asked, well, I think that one of them said that as a candidate was asked if you have anything that you could be blackmailed about. Judge Kavanaugh has said he's been investigated, FBI investigated 6 times, and nothing has turned up. So I'm just curious to know more about what the FBI investigation is comprised of.
Do we have anybody here who had a federal government job that caused the FBI to come and talk to your neighbors? And I mean, I would imagine so, because this is a place where we have a lot of government workers, SES and high up government. So in a regular, in a normal investigation, they're just trying to make sure, that you're not secretly working for the Communist Party, or that you're not looking to undermine faith in the U.S. government in some way, and just make sure that you don't have things that could make you subject to blackmail or something like that. But I don't know what the FBI will be investigating in Judge Kavanaugh's case, but at the very minimum, now that these allegations have surfaced, they're going to investigate them. So they're going to do what law enforcement does in these situations. They're going to talk to witnesses. They're going to see if there are corroborating witnesses or witnesses who don't corroborate. It may be that people don't remember. It may be that they do, and just to have more information. What I think there was another gentleman, Mark Judge, who was allegedly in the room, and he took off to a beach house outside of the area in order not to have to come to talk to testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I don't blame him for not wanting to testify, and he wasn't subject to a subpoena. But the FBI will come and talk to him, and if you lie to the FBI, you're going to get in trouble. So they have a way of getting to truth, and they're also trained questioners, so they'll talk to him and see what they get and what the information is. I don't know what will become public and what won't, but you want to have trained investigators, trained law enforcement officials asking those questions and trying to get to the truth if possible. And it may be that there are conflicting versions of what happened, or people who don't recollect what happened, but it's appropriate for the neutral law enforcement agency, I believe, to be asking those questions and conducting that investigation.
I have a question. What is your stance on the tax cuts? Because to me, it was a big thing, but to Nancy Pelosi and all her money, it was crumbs. Where do you stand on that? Are you going to repeal it, or are you going to let us keep the money that we got?
So for me, I am all for tax cuts and tax reform, but I believe that it should benefit the middle class, and it should benefit those who need it most. So seniors being one of those groups, people on fixed incomes, and middle class. The tax bill that passed, and it should be responsible too. The tax bill that passed Congress on a completely party line vote gives 83% of the benefits to the top 1%. That to me is a problem, especially when it blows up the deficit, the deficit and the debt by $1 trillion a year permanently. And guess who's going to have to pay the bill for that? Not just our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids. You guys are too, because congressional Republicans are already saying that they're going to have to cut Medicare and Social Security in order to be able to pay for the tax cuts. So that to me is not a sustainable future for our nation and for Social Security and Medicare. So I believe in middle class tax relief, absolutely, but I don't believe in cutting Social Security and Medicare and blowing up the debt so that interest on the debt becomes, in 2 years, that'll be the fastest growing part of our budget. I don't believe in doing that to give hedge fund billionaires a huge tax break. So that's my position on on what they passed out of Congress.
When the FBI investigates, they do not investigate anything under the age of 18. They draw the line there. So, past investigations stopped at 18.
I don't know if they can do a special investigation that would allow them to do that. I think that they can do, I don't know that there's anything that prohibits them from doing that if they're ordered to do it by the Judiciary Committee, but I haven't been watching the developments in the news today to see what was actually ordered. Out of committee.
Yes, as a lifelong Democrat who had worked for a senior U.S. Senator, I and others have a real hard problem continuing to be a Democrat given the party's position on abortion. And I was wondering how you view this position that it's in and where some balance can be brought into it.
Well, I don't know that having something as a litmus test either way is appropriate. So the Democratic Party is a big tent party, and it has room for people who are absolutely against abortion and for those who believe that it's a woman's decision to make with her partner if she chooses and with her physician. So for me, it's also an issue of women's autonomy over their own bodies, and being able to make decisions, their own medical decisions, and not. I don't think that's something the government should be doing. So, So I would love to have, a world where there are no unwanted pregnancies and where there's no need for abortion. But until we live in that world. And meanwhile, by the way, Republicans' answer to this is to shut down Planned Parenthood, which is a place where women go for much needed, not just contraception, but also just regular gynecological care. For a lot of women, that's the only place that they ever have gone to for regular checkups and for breast exams and for pap smears and things that are absolutely necessary for women's health. So I think there's room for everybody in the party, and I think that, I would urge you not to make that a litmus test for voting on either side.
Two questions. The House hasn't finished its fiscal work by September 30th for as long as anyone here can remember. They keep postponing it, so on. What's your position on that? And secondly, what's your position on infrastructure funding, which of course is wearing out, getting outdated, and has been totally ignored by the current administration?
So, yes. So the failure of the Senate and the House to be able to come up with an actual budget and actual spending plan, and having to go from CR to CR to CR to from continuing resolution to continuing resolution to continuing resolution, lurching towards a shutdown, is no way to run a country. That said, I'd rather have a continuing resolution than a shutdown, because that is of course the worst possible scenario for our country. On infrastructure, I'm an optimist. I always hope for the best, and I know that Donald Trump ran on infrastructure, and was that was going to be one of the big pillars of his platform. And so I was like, well, maybe that's something where we can find some bipartisan agreement. So I am very disappointed that there has been no movement on infrastructure. Instead, the $1 trillion a year, adding that to the deficit. I do think that infrastructure is a very important priority for me. I serve on the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. I'm on the Transportation Committee in the Senate. The infrastructure investments are very, very important, not just in areas like roads and bridges and railways, on things like access to rural broadband. there are still pretty wide swaths of Virginia 10 and our country where people do not have any high-speed internet access. And that really impacts their ability to compete in anything, you know, academically, in business, all of the above. Also, you know, things like water treatment plants and stuff that are not equipped to deal with these great influxes of water that we're seeing with the new storms that are becoming the new normal. The electric grid, same thing. We need to modernize those as well. So there are many, many infrastructure needs, and it would also put people to work. You know, a lot of people who are out of work right now in a lot of parts of the country, that would put people to work across the country, creating good paying jobs, and then folks who are helping to contribute to the economy. So infrastructure is a very important priority for me. I would hope that we could get some bipartisan agreement on how to make it happen.
I think it's time to declare the Republican Party deceased. And the Trumpicans are now in power. And we should all pray and vote to make sure it doesn't continue.
It is disappointing that people who you would hope would stand up to some of the most divisive parts of Donald Trump's platform and how he acts are not doing so. Yes, and the Republican Party that we're seeing nowadays is not my father's Republican Party, that's for sure.
Just an update. Senator, whoopsie, damn it. Anyway, it looks like they're going to postpone the Senate vote to do an FBI investigation.
Could you say a little bit about climate change and environmental issues? Is there any way we can reverse the administration's depredations on that subject?
Excellent question, and the talking about storms and yes, about climate change and the environment, and is there anything that we can do to fix some of what this administration has done? Donald Trump and Scott Pruitt and the folks he has installed at the EPA are systematically dismantling that agency and turning everything over, not just to the oil and gas interests, but to all kinds of interests. So that is something that is of great concern to me. One of the things that I have fought for in the General Assembly in Virginia is for more renewables. More renewable energy, more clean energy, to make it easier for people to participate in solar programs and wind programs. Now, we are, the administration isn't just, you know, they're dismantling everything that they can when it comes to the environmental rules. One of the first things that they did when taking office was to repeal a whole bunch of Obama-era protections, one of which was the stream protection rule that had prevented coal companies from doing mountaintop removal when it caused rubble that was going to block or change the course of streams. And they repealed that. Barbara Comstock voted to repeal it, and now coal mining companies can blow up mountains and destroy the water quality in those regions. On a state-by-state basis, states are agreeing or trying to comply with the Paris, the climate accords. So in Virginia, Governor McAuliffe had said that he was going to do that. I believe Governor Northam has. we've made some strides in terms of our our renewable energy portfolio, but it hasn't come as a result of the incentives or anything like that. It's come as a result of the businesses who've come here, because Facebook, Amazon, all these groups that have very energy hungry data centers here, they're demanding that we have a certain renewable amount of energy in our portfolio. And the energy producers have been complying with that for the most part. But there's still a lot more we can do. I mean, we need to be doing more. The U.S. should be a leader on this, and instead we're standing in the way. So, there are things that we can do, but it's going to be difficult under this administration.
Right here.
A question about the FBI investigation that would deal with the new allegations that came up at the Kavanaugh hearing.
Raise your hand. Oh, you're all the way in the back.
I'm wondering, can the committee ask for that to start, or does it still have to come from President Trump to do the investigation?
I'm not sure I know the definitive answer to that, but I would imagine that the committee can. I mean, I know that 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 at the state level we'd be able to do that. We wouldn't need the executive to determine that an investigation take place.
The Republican Party is throwing millions of dollars against you in the next 5 weeks. Are you adequately funded?
I did not plant that question, if anybody's wondering. But no, I'm not adequately funded. So yes, the National Republican Committee has committed to spend $5 million attacking me on TV over the next however many weeks. And we need to be able to counteract that. So, we have an amazing ground game. We are raising a bunch of money, people are motivated, but we always need more. Also, one of the things that's been so inspiring to me, and I saw it in 2017 in our elections last year, is all of the grassroots support that we've been getting, and people coming out and volunteering and knocking on doors, people who've never been motivated before, who say, I've got to do everything I can to stop this. I can't feel the way that I felt when Donald Trump was elected ever again. And all those folks have been coming out and volunteering and helping us. And it's really inspiring to see all the people who are doing that. And, same thing with Judge Kavanaugh. We've had several folks come out and volunteer and sign up for shifts because they're just so enraged by everything that's going on. And so they're being very helpful. But yes, Wexton for Congress. If you
One last question. Who wants it?
One more question.
Ms. Wexton, you're talking about money and funding elections and so forth and so on, which leads to my question. Over the years, we have all seen the fact that lobbyists and corporations are running our country, literally, because they give money to congressmen and senators for re-elections, and they compromise all of you to the extent that you can't do the job that you want to do. Is there any force that is forming to try to counteract, especially getting rid of the lobbyists?
So there is increasingly, and I would love to have comprehensive campaign finance reform. That would be the best thing in the world, because running for office is, what I want to do is spend my time talking with voters. I don't want to spend my time in a call time room talking to donors, and that's what we have to do a lot of the time.
Increase your term of office from 2 to 4 years, too.
Well, that might be a little more challenging, but one thing at a time. But there's a group called End Citizens United. End Citizens United, which is really effective, and they're getting rolling with different, and they're making a lot of noise and getting involved in making campaign finance reform a big part of people's reason to come out and vote and what they're trying to do, to accomplish. Because there are things that we can do in terms of contribution limits and stuff like that, that we can do that would still fit within Citizens United, but getting rid of that decision and changing that law, I think would be very beneficial to our country, because corporations are people unless we want them to pay taxes, and then they're not people anymore, according to the lobbyists that are making those donations.
All right, one more.
What happened to Common Cause? Archibald Cox was the chairman of it, and I worked with them for many years, and I retired and went away, and I don't know what happened to him. Common Cause.
What happened to Common Cause? Yeah, no, I remember them, but I'm not sure. I've not heard as much from them of late, but yes, they did a lot about grassroots and people-powered politics. I will look that up and see, because I don't know whether they've been subsumed in another group or if they're still lobbying, but just more quietly. So I'll look into that. But good question.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
Senator
guys so
Wexton.
much.
We really appreciate you.
My pleasure. It's always nice to come back.
As you know, we always invite every candidate who will be on your ballot in November to come here to Ashby Ponds. A week ago, we had Corey Stewart, who's running against Tim Cade for Senate. The next candidate will be on Senator Kane on October 15th, 1 o'clock, right here. I have made 9 invitations to Congresswoman Comstock's office via either email or telephone. I wrote yesterday and said this is the last time that I will send an invitation. And lo and behold, I got back from dinner last night, and here on my telephone was a message. Oh, she certainly wants to come to Ashby Ponds. We'll be in touch. So watch the purple paper, and maybe we'll be able to get all 4 here before November. Thank you again, Senator Wexton.